All right, let's go ahead and get started. So we'll be talking about DevOps and the DevOps journey today and how companies who aren't just Netflix or Etsy or others can actually do a DevOps process. We're a 85-year-old telco with 48,000 people. So how in the world does a company like that actually do DevOps? So we'll talk a little bit about that journey. I'm the VP of product for CenturyLink, so work with our teams to make sure that we actually deliver our solutions. I do some other things, and if you haven't already read the description, then we're not going to read that together. But the whole point of this session is to talk about the culture, the values, the practices of actually practically doing a DevOps process. This is for informational purposes only, so you can also use this for your Thanksgiving party if you're in a lulling conversation. We'll talk a little bit about starting up with DevOps. We'll talk through some of the values and journey and give you a sense of what actually a week looks like for our organization when we're doing DevOps. It's hard to find surveys that don't tell you that a lot of people are trying to do this right now. I can find all sorts of numbers. This one I trusted. It was around a quarter of companies are aggressively looking at adopting DevOps. And so that's the new reality, is companies are looking at ways to use these sort of techniques. The question is, how do you make sure it's not a wrong fit? How do you not just do things because you read it on the internet that this is a great idea, and now all of a sudden you're confused because your culture isn't improving, your processes aren't improving? Where you're really trying to get to is speed, efficiency, effectiveness. You're trying to build the right thing faster. So how are you using things like DevOps to actually be more productive and learn from, be a learning organization? So really the way you're going to do that is by keeping an eye on others who do it, right? You can kind of have some templates and blueprints for how do you keep track of how other companies are in this journey that look kind of like you and learn from that process. That's what we're going to focus on a little bit today, is how one example company does that. So what are those values that matter? I'm only going to pull out a few of those, but if you don't have the values for this stuff, it's not worth buying the tools. The tools make no difference if your culture is not going to also adjust to this sort of speed and collaboration. So communication for us is huge. You've got to have transparency in your communication. You have to make sure it's honest communication between teams. It's a big part of how we work in our organization, is making sure that this is very frequent, fast-moving information. You should never be satisfied. Don't be grouchy and dissatisfied all the time, but the goal is that you shouldn't be satisfied with the status quo. How do you constantly improve processes? How are you constantly looking at ways to get better? And we'll talk about some of the practical ways we do that. And for us, there's got to be a goal there of, am I looking to make the customer happy? Am I trying to save money? You need the right values and principles for this sort of thing to be successful. So for us, it's about how are we doing things that make the customer experience great, and that kind of drives these other discussions of tools and process and so forth. So what are some of the logistics? How do we actually arrange ourselves to be somewhat DevOps focused? Well, first of all, if we look at the org structure, who doesn't have an exciting presentation about org charts? If we look at where we were before we made this transformation, it was very traditional, right? You've got your different VP silos, you've got different teams under that, and we were still doing DevOps in this model, but it was harder because you weren't arranged in a way that was as collaborative. It's really easy for folks to just try to apply tools and process without making some of the hard changes. So often DevOps is about actually changing your team structure. It's not just saying we're going to buy some tools and bring in some consultants and we'll be DevOps in no time. That is not going to probably make a difference for you. Instead, it's how am I even looking at the org differences? So we pivoted our teams and instead did a team-based structure. We've got 30 plus some odd feature teams that all work on a piece of the software, and they can ship on their own schedule. They can use the tools they want to use. And so we've arranged this way where they're very flat, very simple teams that have product owners and engineers. That's most of the team structure. And so by doing that, it helps us be much more effective, much faster, and arranging this way isn't the most efficient thing. You have some duplication and some redundancy, but you make that up in agility. And for us, adaptability and agility is a lot more important than just having efficiencies everywhere. So this is a big part for us. So what's that tool chain? What tools do we use every single day to try to be more effective in this? Well, we look at simple things. We use Trello for our backlog management, for our planning process, even for retrospectives. When we have a disruption in service or a customer incident, we'll do retrospectives and we'll store those action items in a tool called Trello. Really great, simple, easy to use, trying to keep things easy. We use GitHub a lot. This is where our source control goes. This is where our bugs go. We're just trying to make it easy to have a very easy internet accessible repository for not just source code, but also all of our interesting metadata and bugs and issues. We do love Slack as our communication tool. I haven't gotten an email from an engineer in 6 months. That's a great sign of happiness for me. It means that we're all chatting in real time. I hate meetings. We don't want to have meetings if we don't have to. I want to ask questions and get answers. So we love using Slack. We even can deploy our entire public-facing website by typing one line into Slack because we've built these bots into the system where I can open bugs, I can deploy our site, I can do all sorts of things just from within the Slack application. Of course, you have to interact with customers. That is kind of important. So we use Zendesk as one technology for interacting with customers. How do I do bugs and tickets? How do we even do our feature triage when customers submit new feature ideas? The goal for us is we don't use any software that doesn't have an API. If I can't programmatically integrate with it into my other stuff, it's not worth us buying. Sometimes you do actually have to have meetings as a last resort. So we do use things like WebEx and Global Meet and GoToMeeting and those sorts of tools to actually stand up a meeting. And as you look at the CA suite, we don't necessarily use all of these yet, but as you look at what else you need to fill out this suite, as you look at release automation, how do I make sure that I'm using the right type of software to deploy things out and doing continuous deployment? And that's a big piece of a DevOps pipeline, is how do I go from less inventory, meaning features that aren't released, into something that's actually shipped where I can get some value out of it. CA also has some of the project and portfolio management because you do need upper level visibility into projects and pace and timing and staffing. And so what kind of tools are you using that don't mean I have to have status reports every week and I have to have people in meetings all the time? How can I have the right level of visibility where I can go get that info? And then monitoring is a huge piece of DevOps, is how am I actually collecting information, often making the team that caused the problem fix the problem. I mean, for us, all of our feature teams, if you build the service, you run the service. So I don't have an ops team in an organization. Every single feature team runs their own service. And you'd be amazed at how much better the code gets when the developer gets paged on a Sunday morning when something breaks. So it's something that builds a lot of trust and accountability within the teams. Our teams aren't accountable to management, they're accountable to each other. That makes a big difference. So as you look at monitoring and management, how am I giving teams the tools to find out that their systems are healthy? So Workspace. It's really hard to have a cube farm and do DevOps. Maybe some of you do, and I'm sorry. You do want to make sure you're thinking about organizationally arranging yourselves differently. We rebuilt our floor, 30,000 square feet in Bellevue, and just finished in St. Louis as well, and redid the floor. And we made it into team rooms. These are not open spaces. These are team rooms where each functional team has a space. They have things like couches and TVs to do webinars when they need to. But it's meant to be a space where everybody in that room is on the same project or on the same service. One of our engineers made this clear a few months ago when he tweeted this out, that open spaces are typically counterproductive because it's so noisy and disruptive. Instead, a team room is much more productive because all the conversation is relevant. Right? Somebody swivels their chair and talks to the infrastructure engineer and the developer, they work together, they solve the problem. Everybody else probably wants to listen in on that as well. So it makes a big difference for us to co-locate people as much as possible. Common spaces are important too. I mean, you read enough of the research behind this, that you need to force people to intersect with each other. And so we make sure that there's a lot of rules. I can't take phone calls in a team room. I'm not allowed to eat in a team room. Instead, I need to be in our common spaces where we bring lunch a couple days a week, teams sit together and they just collaborate with each other, right? It's not about having teams that are silos. It's about forcing some of that cross-pollination and forcing those accidental meetups. The executive engagement's important. Our senior VP, we ride tricycles around the office sometimes. They did take them away because we kept crashing them, but now we have scooters, which are not as safe. They're probably worse. But the most important thing is we got to get out there. You know that it doesn't matter what your title is. We don't believe in positional authority. We mean that there's a lot of leaders in an organization and everybody needs to be engaged. So there's 4 offices in our entire floor. Everybody else is in team rooms or shared spaces, and that's the point, is that we're trying to make sure that everybody is involved in the process. We do a lot of community events. How do you make the space, how do you get people engaged in what we're doing? So whether it's a Raspberry Pi Hack Day, which we did a few months ago, or having evening meetups, just how are we creating a learning culture where you're also engaging, you're trying new things, you're bringing in new technologies as a team and learning those things. So let's talk a little bit about execution. I'm putting together a fictitious week. My weeks aren't always this exciting, but this is a bit of a week of maybe a typical or a somewhat realistic look at what a week of DevOps can look like. So let's talk about Mondays. Mondays, every single Monday morning, every day, weekday, we have our team stand up. It's involving of leaders in every single part of the organization. It takes about 5 minutes. It's not a time to pontificate. It's a time to say, any major things on the calendar for today, any major customer interruptions, nope, let's get back to work. Who has anything to say? All right, we're good. This is quick, it's timely, but it's a routine. One of the best things about these processes is creating routines around this that everyone knows that you show up at stand-up, you get yourself situationally aware of what's going on. Every Monday at 10, I meet with the team and we go through every single feature that someone submitted from the previous week. And it's a cross-functional team of security and feature teams and customer support, because something I might reject is not relevant. Customer support person says, we just had 5 tickets last week on this, you better fix that. So it's a great way to get a cross-pollination across teams, and everybody can see what our customers are asking for, not just one team that takes it all in and triages it. The person who's on call gets called Batman or Batgirl, depending on the gender, of course. But that Batman wears the pager using pager duty, and they're the one on call for the week. Every feature team has a Batman. Batman is cooler than on call, so that's why we call them Batman. But the idea is that this person's on call, and it really builds a heck of a lot of customer empathy when the developers on a team are the ones also interacting. It's kind of tier 3 support. If something can't be handled by that first tier, it goes to the feature team. And that feature team's on the hook for actually helping the customer. So it really helps break down that silo again between I build it and I hand it to someone else to run it. If you build it, you run it, and you talk to customers and you find out their pain points. Executive communication. Every single week we send something to the entire C-level of the organization and the managers below them that summarizes our revenue for the week, major deals, things in our pipeline, business cases waiting approval, status of the roadmap. We're going to make sure we over-communicate, and people can choose not to read that, but instead we're really trying to make sure we pump information out so that everybody knows what our priorities are. There's no hidden things, right? And it's not about just shiny good metrics. We need to show hard metrics. We need to be honest to make sure that everybody sees the state of the business. That's Mondays. Tuesdays. As we think about this, again, the key is stand-up every single day, because that's really important to us to make sure that there is a routine and people know that we're getting that feedback. But a couple times a week, some of the feature teams also do their own stand-ups, and my own team, we meet twice a week just to make sure we're syncing on major issues. This is only 15 minutes. We just make sure that, you know what, we share some issues, we talk about the business of the day, and we all get back to work. No, I have a 45-person team, and no one sends me status reports, and I love that. I jump in their Slack channel if I want to know what they're working on. I look at their backlog. We sync a little bit once a week. That's it, right? It's about trying to make myself aware of what everyone's doing without burdening them with excess information. As we do releases, we make sure our support team gets trained, because it's about making sure that everyone is well informed. So we'll sit down with our training team, our support team, before we do a release. And we'll actually show them what's new, what bugs did we fix, which new features are coming out, what questions should you anticipate. So we make sure that the frontline engineers are as smart as anyone about what's going on there. And we do platform deployments. We used to do 21 business days, now we ship every 15 days. It makes it a lot of fun when you have 30 teams shipping roughly every 15 days. It's madness and it's awesome. It's great to see that sort of velocity come out, and the only way that works is by giving each team self-sufficiency. Right? If there was some command and control pipeline for deployments, this would not work. Instead, each team does their own deployments. They make sure they manage their dependencies, and the few of us who are stuck as overhead just try to make sure the dependencies are in line. So platform deployments are a non-event. We push to 14 data centers around the world in less than an hour with pretty much no interruptions. We used to watch movies during deployments, now we can't get through one. I think that's a good thing. What's great is our website team. If you go to ctl.io, it's our public website, we ship this 4 or 5 times a day. And it's great to just watch. Again, I can go into Slack myself right now and deploy our website by just issuing a command that says deploy production website. And so how do we make sure we're constantly iterating different parts of our business, whether that's the cloud platform that we have, or whether that's our public website, or a backup service, or a DR service, all of those can ship independently. But that takes a lot of trust, it takes a lot of empowerment, so it's obviously something you have to work your way into. So what are Wednesdays? Well, hey, we're starting up with stand-up again. It's important, it's the same routine every day, it's the same people involved. We write things on the board so everybody walks in the room and can see calendar for the day, issues of the day, and we can add to that from there. But then we have things like sprint planning. We really focus on those feature teams, on empowering the teams that actually do the work. So for us, a product manager does not tell a team, this is what you're going to ship this sprint. They give them their priorities and say, here are your priorities right now, and the team tells us when they've taken in enough work to the sprint. What that means is that team's now accountable. No one told them how much work they had to do. It's now they're on the hook for that, and that team then holds themselves accountable. If they're falling behind, it's not because they're messing with us and telling us what to do. It's the team looks at each other and says, how do we pick up the slack? How do we make sure and fix our process? I walk in that room and see how the team does continuous improvement to make up for gaps that they had, or hey, they overestimated something or underestimated, but we make sure that the teams own that accountability there. Our teams do brown bags all the time. This is fun. Every time there's a release, teams walk up and do something in our common space where they demonstrate their new feature, and that often spawns great discussion with other teams that say, oh, you're using Kafka, you're using Cassandra databases, I need that. And they're starting to cross-pollinate their technology because it's some show and tell time. It's really important to have every team do some show and tell, and not just during fixed corporate presentations, but having these teams talking to each other is really important to us. Things like Ask the Experts. We do some things every month where anybody in the company can call in, and we have the executive team, myself and a few others, there to just answer questions. And it's about strategy, roadmap, feature releases, competitive intelligence. What do you want to talk about? How are you making sure that people at the quote-unquote top of the organization are completely accessible? Because the people in the top of your organization should understand your strategy as well as the people implementing it, if not better. So when a few of us as VPs can sit there on a call and talk about the feature release and the priorities of it, that's important to us. You can't be so disconnected as you move up the hierarchy. You have to be just as connected as the teams building it. We open sourced our knowledge base at the beginning of the year. It's in GitHub right now. Any of you could fork it, copy it, steal it for your own, do whatever you'd like. We have a few customers doing that, not stealing it, forking it. But they've been able to take it, and the idea is that we have people in the field updating our knowledge base, customers updating our knowledge base, us, I write knowledge base articles a few times a month. The key is, how do you open source your knowledge? How do you make sure that it's not locked up in documents in some SharePoint repository somewhere that no one will ever find? How do you make sure that your content and your information is as widely accessible as possible? We're trying to get out of intranets and put more of our content on the public website. How do we make sure that all of our stuff is discoverable? Because a great document locked away is meaningless. So we get into Thursdays. Hey, guess what? We're doing cloud stand-up. So that's important for us. Keep it going. That product team stand-up, I spend time every Thursday with a half hour of bringing in guest speakers. Sometimes it's vendors. Sometimes it's other teams at CenturyLink. Sometimes it's internal teams presenting to each other. This product team wants to show off what they're doing to their peers. How are you giving opportunities for your teams to show and tell to each other? This is just important for me that you see most surveys that people cap out at a certain dollar amount before it doesn't make them much happier. They're focused on a learning organization. How are you making work? It doesn't have to always be fun. You might not be riding scooters around your office, but how do they feel like they're learning? Are they growing? Are they getting opportunities to share and show off a little bit? That makes work so much more interesting for my colleagues to be able to do these sorts of things. Operations review. This is something we do once a month, and this is different books you read. There's a kind of a common pattern, as you see in really fast-moving learning organizations, is how do you do a very transparent, honest business review once a month? So we have the entire product team as well as executive leadership in a room for 7 hours. Every team gets 10 minutes, and they walk through their core business metrics. How are you doing? And if something is way too green and everything looks perfect, and I know that can't be the case, what's going on with this? How come we're not talking about that? It's a very transparent, sometimes rough session for the first time someone's getting used to it, but it's meant to be. How are we pulling back the curtains, right? How are we being really transparent about the metrics that matter to this business and then collectively improving, right? When we can all in the room find out that sales are going down on this product and everyone can chime in going, I bet we could fix something here. What about if we do something with that? So by continuing to pull back those curtains, we're able to get better. So this is a fun session. It's exhausting, but it's also something that really makes us better as a business. I have news for you. Clouds do experience interruptions. That should not be shocking to any of you. I hope not, but this is remarkably complicated distributed system stuff. When you end up with hundreds of thousands of machines and hard drives and whatever, even if they have a very long mean time between failures, when I have a lot of them, I'm going to have them fail from time to time because there's so many of those things. So cloud providers do the best they can to build for redundancy, but it's also about things do happen, right? Networks get overwhelmed or hardware fails or hypervisors experience glitches. How do you handle that? So let's say on this Thursday you do have one, gremlins cause the problem, and you just try to at least recover from that. On Friday, of course, we're doing stand-ups. And it's important then to jump into things like ticket escalations. This is where it goes back to the feature team. So if something goes wrong and my frontline support engineers can't address it, it goes to the Batman on call for that given feature. We offer managed operating systems. Is it a problem with managed operating systems? It goes to that feature team, and now they're accountable for closing that ticket and resolving it successfully. Is it with our backup service? Is it with our bare metal servers, our platform as a service, our IaaS? Any of those things, it goes to the appropriate feature team as a next tier support, and we make sure that gets addressed. So what's really important for us is that in an outage, we do not call these postmortems, because that implies there's a dead body that we're all hovering over. Instead, it's a retrospective. How are we taking a look at what happened and getting better? So these are really amusing for people from the outside to come in and watch us do this, because it's not about, can we blame this person for being dumb, or this software is terrible, let's just blame the vendor and leave the room. Instead, it's about, I want you to come in here and we spend the first 10 minutes listing everything that went well, everything that didn't go well, and after that, we create an action plan for every single thing that didn't go well and assign a person to it that we will review within the week. So we had an incident earlier last year where there was some misbehavior in our cage, and you could have argued it was just the person on call who did something bad, but we generated 65 things to do to get better. Processes should have been better. We should have had this ready. We didn't respond quick enough here. And so it becomes not a, how can I blame people, but how do you actually get better at this? And this is hard. Some corporate cultures are not set up for this right now, right? When something goes wrong, the first thing to do is say, it must be that guy or that gal. Instead, it takes a different change in culture to say it's okay to make mistakes. What's more important is to actually learn from it. So again, these are quick. We usually get done these in less than an hour, but we do these when there's a customer issue. We do this when there's a service interruption. We use retrospectives as a weapon to get better as a company, but it definitely takes a cultural change. Try to make sure we do all hands meetings from time to time, just to be informative. How are we making sure that people are enjoying success together? How are we highlighting new customers? How are we highlighting the business? Our all hands meeting has hundreds of people in it, and we go over our financial metrics for a couple minutes. How are we doing? How's our OpEx? How's our CapEx? What are the big deals in the pipeline? Because everyone should be stakeholders in this. I don't want that one engineer to say, my job is just to do this. I don't really care what's happening over here. We're all in this together. We succeed as a business successfully or not. And so we try to make sure we create a shared awareness, shared ownership of all of this sort of thing. On Saturdays, things do happen, so Batman does occasionally get paged on Saturdays. Super Bowl Sunday is not a good time for Batman. They all try to pawn off their on-call duty. But it's great. Again, I can tell who Batman is every week by who submits the most tickets. Because, hey, we've got to improve logging. Hey, we need to improve the monitoring here. Hey, our deployment is not working right here. Because when the team, again, owns that, it's not just the poor SAPs in operations who have to maintain this growing pool of systems and to keep losing the knowledge. All that institutional knowledge is in the team. It's on the person on call. So it's important for us to make sure we're learning from people on the journey. How are we making sure that you are learning from others? There is no template for this. I cannot sell you DevOps in a box. Anybody on this floor who's doing that might be a little bit crazy. This takes cultural changes. It takes changes in tools. Look, if I have tools but a bad culture, all I'm doing is things maybe more efficiently, but I'm doing the wrong things. But if I have culture with no tools, all I'm doing is having an awesome way to try to do things, but not the mechanism to do it better. So it still takes a marriage between those two things. Keep following these companies. You're not behind if you're not doing all this stuff right now, but the time is now to start looking at this, because companies who use velocity as a strategic advantage are winning. And they're getting products to market faster, they're collecting feedback faster, they're iterating with their customers faster. Speed is a competitive advantage, and DevOps helps that. It's something that's fun for us. So of course I've got to flog myself for a second. So CenturyLink's over there. We do have a public infrastructure as a service cloud that focuses on bare metal machines, virtual machines, platform as a service. We build this and iterate this on a very fast basis. We can link to one of the largest networks in the world on CenturyLink's backbone. We already have many of these CA applications ready to go with one click in 15 minutes on the platform. So we try to make it easy for you to get up and going. Right? How do I get some of the controls I need to manage an environment, but I also want the self-service, right? That's why people are going to cloud, is I want self-service, pay as I go, but how do I keep some of the controls in place? And we try to marry that. So we got some good demos over there. I'll be over there demo monkeying later to show you some of these things, but it's not the technology, right? I don't care what technology you pick. That's probably blasphemy to say here, but it doesn't matter the technology. What matters is, what are your values? Are you using those values to make sure that you're picking technology that helps you get there? And if you find a better technology, switch to it. we're not beholden to any of those technologies I showed you. I'll switch tomorrow if I find something better. So that's the key, is just making sure it's about the people, it's about making sure they're empowered, and trying to build great stuff. So with that, any questions, you can walk up to the mic. I'll also be hanging out here, but this is an amazing time to be building technology solutions. I don't care if you're a biotech company or you're a content management company or a cloud company, you're all software companies at this point. And how are you using technology to empower your sales staff, deliver new services? What a great time to be doing this stuff, but let's keep trying to do it better. All right, any questions? Good, thank you.